Hi, I'm Philip Oliver.
And I'm Andrew Oliver.
And together we're the Oliver Twins. So how did we get into making games? Well, I guess it all started when we were young. We were 11, 12, early 80s, into sci-fi, watching programs on TV like Buck Rogers.
Star Wars
in 77, obviously. I had Star Wars wallpaper, it was really, really cool.
We were into that stuff and anything that's new, modern, techy.
Yeah, first kids with digital watch, first kids with sort of electronic, sort of Space Invaders.
I was going to say arcades, but if the games were only just been invented, but arcades did exist because there were always pinball machines and fruit machines, and then the TV ones turned up, which was Space Invaders and Pac-Man, that we absolutely loved, particularly Asteroids. We played a hell of a lot of Asteroids.
It's good for 2 players, Asteroids, because one can be on the hyperspace and one can actually be and shooting.
Yeah. So,
but the other one could stay out.
But obviously, keep putting your money in and then going out to these places on Saturday afternoons and stuff. It's like, well, the idea of having a computer at home was brilliant. And obviously, the UK in the early 80s saw many home computers because actually, all teenage boys, I have to say, because it didn't include many other people, but all teenage boys, that was every Christmas present wish list was, I want a home computer, whether it be a VIC-20, an Atari VCS or Spectrums and ZX81s. So we desperately wanted one, and our parents said that's an awful lot of money because they were typically around £200, which in today's money, it's the kind of buying a PlayStation 4 or something. That's the sort of the money, and it's like, well, are you going to use this? And they looked pretty rudimentary, and
you had to have a vision to actually see that there was some value there.
Yeah. So, but we were convinced that we wanted to sort of play with this, not only to play the games, but we were actually really interested about how it all worked. So we decided that, well, we'd save up our pocket money because Christmas was a long, long way away and our birthday was near Christmas.
And we'd already got the bug because our brother had bought a second-hand ZX81.
So we played with it a bit. It's a bit rubbish, and that's I think that's the worry. Is like, well, this computer's supposedly better, but you'll get bored of that pretty quick as well. It's like, well, we don't think we will, but we'll go and save up our pocket money, and that was never going to work. So we ended up taking a newspaper round to try to get money faster because we were keen as hell to sort of get hold of a home computer.
And so that was, we managed to get hold of a Dragon 32 as our sort of first colour computer that was ours, and that was September 82. From that newspaper money, we hadn't actually quite collected enough, but our parents kind of subbed the rest of it because we got about halfway.
Everyone else was getting Spectrums, by the way, around us.
All VIC-20s.
And the VIC-20 seemed to be the popular one. It is a bit obscure and random that we did a Dragon 32, but I have to say, you look at a Spectrum and it was a tiny little keyboard, and then like, oh, typing on that. We wanted something with a proper keyboard because we imagined ourselves actually typing, and we'd used the ZX81, and trying to do typing listings on a ZX81 was really hard, and we were thinking, well, the Spectrum's not much more, and it's quite frustrating typing in.
But the Dragon 32s had an awesome keyboard.
Yeah, and it was boasting proper colour, and actually it was quite good.
It was quite good, but nobody else had one. And they didn't really write many games for it.
Yeah, well, that's actually an advantage, the fact that we got hold of a computer that had a good basic, good colour, good keyboard, hardly any games that you could buy for it. So we ended up going, well, we'll have to kind of make our own entertainment. You're going to spend each evening sitting down. Now, if we'd have had a Spectrum, it would have been difficult to program and use, but very easy to just load up a game. And we would have spent our evenings just playing the games other people made. But on a Dragon, it's like you buy 1 or 2 games and going, oh, that's all.
But you turned on these 8-bit computers and they always threw up a basic and a cursor, and you could type sort of 10 print hello world, 20 go to 10.
And it would just...
And it's like, I'm in control of the computer! And that was actually really exciting. And that's one thing that doesn't exist today, which is a bit of a shame. So you have your smartphone, you have your PC, and you can't really kind of take control of it very easily. Whereas in those days, it was like, oh right, well I've done 2 instructions, now let's do a third line, and a 4th line, and a 5th line. And 3 or 4 weeks later, you've got a little Pac-Man going around a screen.
And I mean, the BBC was best for this, but what I was going to say is the Dragon actually had an interesting feature in the fact that it had some basic drawing commands, so you could just draw lines around the screen. So it was very easy to sort of draw patterns of cobwebs and stuff, which was We all know from Windows backdrops, the screensavers, those sort of things. But it was so simple to do that on a Dragon, and it also had sprite commands. So it was very, very easy to get a Pac-Man or a Space Invader just moving around the screen in BASIC, which actually was quite difficult on a Commodore 64 or a Spectrum. It's like within the BASIC, there wasn't the feature to just move characters around the screen. So actually, that was a real big plus, that within days, we had things moving around very simply.
So the first piece of work that we actually had published was a type-in listing in computer and video games called Roadrunner, and that was actually for the Dragon 32. We got paid for that, £50, and we used that £50 to buy a BBC Micro because it was clear that this was a much more powerful machine, much easier to use, much easier to learn things on. So actually our next work was all on the BBC, and our big gig that we won, that was sort of a milestone really, was winning a national TV competition, the Saturday show, with a game called Strategy, although when it was released it was renamed to Gambit for Acorn Soft.
Philip and Andrew Oliver from Trowbridge in Wiltshire, where are they? Come on down, you guys.
Why did you actually write it, and what was the basis for it?
Well, a lot of people have been trying to write arcade games in BASIC, which are far too slow, and we really thought we couldn't get one sort of a high enough quality, so we had to turn to a slow game, sort of more family game. And we came up with this idea after playing some board games.
And something I do find funny about that was the fact that we wrote it on a BBC Micro, which is a TV channel, and the other TV channel was the one that did the competition, which was ITV. And so you'll notice on the footage they said they have a nice computer of their own. It's like, they want it, I'd say BBC.
What are these guys' prizes anyway? And I know that everybody will be green with envy. They got a nice computer of their own at home, so we said, why don't you choose another prize? And you've decided to go for what's called a high-resolution monitor, whatever that is, for goodness sake. I suppose you lot know. Sounds like something who collects the rubbers at the end of class. But anyway, a high-resolution monitor, and also the possibility that top manufacturers, Commodore, are going to market your game and it'll actually appear on the high street.
We just thought that was kind of funny. Yeah, I mean, it was one of those sort of fad things. We were teenagers, and like all of our teenage friends, our geeky friends anyway, but half of them, we were all just all into playing computer games. It's the same as anyone now sort of thing. But we said, oh, we think we can make sort of a career out of doing this. And it was like, well, no, you can't, because these things are just a passing fad. And anyway, you don't get much money for them, because we had started to get one or two published whilst we were at school.
But it wasn't much money.
We were getting £100, £250 and stuff like that. You can't exactly get a mortgage on these kind of things. But we came to the end of our sixth form with our A-levels, and it was all about everyone going off to university. Our friends were going to university. We did some sort of interviews and offers at university. But there weren't games programming courses, and there were some programming courses, and it was about programming databases, and it
Dull as dishwater.
so dull. And we were just like, we're not going to university to do that stuff. That's just so boring. And so we were just complaining that we didn't want to go to university when all of our friends and our parents expected us to. But luckily, our head teacher, or head of sixth form, who was very, very friendly with us and our parents, just said to our parents, give them a year out, because they're very, very passionate about this, and they've clearly published some games, they've just got no money. But the challenge was, make it a business. Like, can you actually make money from writing games? Because it was a hobby. And it was a hobby for most people, frankly.
Yeah, so we had to get serious then, because we had 1 year to prove to our parents that we could make a business.
Otherwise, we went to university, and we didn't want to go.
So we had to look at sort of what was going to sell, and we came up with this idea. We'd seen that one of the best-selling games at the time was Ghostbusters, the game for the movie, the one written by, is it David Crane, for Activision, and it was bestseller. And we thought, well, if you can pick a name that will sell, then that's going to be really popular. But we can't afford to buy movie rights. It's like, we don't even know how that works. So we came up with the idea of Robin Hood, because we thought, well, nobody owns it, but you will recognise it. So if you use the name Robin Hood, everybody kind of knows, hey, that sounds fun, we're going to use bow and arrows, projectile weapons, really good.
You're in castles.
You're going to have enemies, there's a hero.
So we were saying we know it would conjure up a certain gameplay that we could make a really good game of, and we know that anyone hearing or seeing it will go, I know what that game is.
Yeah.
And so that was our way of getting recognition, because there were lots of games which were coming out, like, I don't know, Equinox or something. And you go, well,
What is it?
It's like there were loads of Xeviouses and like these just made up words, and we were going, how does anyone know what they're buying?
And the artwork's usually quite poor. So you go walk into a shop and you see all these cassettes, and I don't know what the name is, and the artwork looks rubbish. So what am I going to buy? Oh, there's Ghostbusters.
So we knew what
Ghostbusters was. Well, and Ghostbusters was an awesome movie, obviously. So it's like, well, we've got to be aligned with that. We've got to be more like Ghostbusters and less like these made-up things. So we came up with the idea of Super Robin Hood. We went to a trade show in London in the September of '86.
Which is when our friends were all just going off to university. We went to a trade show and met the Darling Brothers. They were just setting up, well, actually it was digital computers at that point, but they were just setting up, they hadn't found a name, I don't think, but they were just setting up a computer company. Rich and David had written some games for Mastertronics. They'd made a reasonable amount of royalties, and then they now wanted to set up their own company. And they were looking for developers to write games, and we just got on really well with them and said, yeah, we can write games. We said that we'd had some published. We hadn't made any money out of it, but we had some games published.
I remember we sort of had a bag of sort of here we've had this published.
Like
this
CV.
Published. Yeah, exactly. And we've got an idea for a new game. Super Robin Hood, brought it out, piece of paper. It was little more than 2 or 3 pages of paper, but it was Super Robin Hood. And we sort of said, so if we wrote this, how much would you pay us? And David Darling said £10,000.
Which we just couldn't believe. It's just like, hang on. We've always dealt in hundreds.
It's like £10,000. It's like, yeah. And it's like, okay. Well, I was going to say we didn't sleep. What actually happened was we had one computer, and most of the time one was typing, one was writing, drawing, designing, and then you'd take sort of 4-hour stint sleeps. So it's 20 hours work, 4 hours sleep, 20 hours work, 4 hours sleep. And we did that for the whole of the September through the first week of October, finished the game, took it back to them and said, there you go, £10,000 please. And they loaded it up and they had a look at it, and they were like, that's really, really nice, that's a brilliant game and everything. So here's the contract, and they bring out the contract, and the contract was actually for royalties. It was like
10p per cassette.
10p per cassette, and it's like, that's not £10,000. And then they were very quick to sort of jump in and go, no, but we're going to duplicate, whatever it was, 20,000 copies or something, and we will sell every single one, so that's £2,000 absolutely guaranteed.
But it depends how many we can sell.
And
in
then
the shops.
that's just first duplication run. So if it goes really, really well, it could get up to 10,000. A little bit disappointing.
But for 6 weeks' work, we were going to get a minimum of $2,000.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, that's the best offer on the table.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we'll
go with that. That's fine. That's fine for 2 weeks, 4 weeks worth of work. We'll do that. And they produced the artwork. It was a really nice cover. We were very pleased with that. We were enthusiastic. We went back, started writing another game immediately. That would be Ghost Hunters. The game went out a few weeks later. You could duplicate cassettes so quickly, put them into the shops so quickly, and it went straight to #1. The reviews were absolutely fantastic, all in the 90s, and the royalties started coming in. And by the time we got to our first royalty statement in January, February time, it was close to 10,000, if not £10,000.
So it was all fine.
It was all fine, it all worked out. And so we just kept writing, and we'd already set up this principle of sort of working very, very hard, 7 days a week, stupid hours.
There was a kind of, well...
Got to do it again.
We've got to prove that wasn't just a stroke of luck, that we could actually do it again. Yeah. So we put as much work into sort of Ghost Hunters, going, we've got to prove that we can do it again. And we did. And people go, okay, that was good. Yeah. But maybe still a ton of luck. It's like, no, we were on a roll here.
And then we saw, we were, I think, 17, 18, had a bit of a dodgy, rusty old car. And Rich and David, one had an MR2 and one had a Celica. Now, we already saw the royalties coming in, and I remember one time pulling up to their offices in our dodgy old car and parking next to their lovely cars, going, the amount of money that we could make off a game, we could almost buy one of those.
Yeah.
Let's just make another game.
And buy a nice car.
And buy a nice car. And actually, the game we actually made was Grand Prix Simulator. So we thought, hey, we could do a game about cars, because Richard Darling had just written BMX Simulator for the Commodore 64, which was hugely successful. So we were like, we could do a game like BMX Simulator, only with cars. Be a bit like Super Sprint. We kind of did know about that, but it was really inspired by the BMX Simulator. We could do that, and then we can go and buy a nice car like that.
And that was the plan, and we did it. So, a Honda Integra.
So we had the Dragon 32. That made us not in the Spectrum camp and not in the Commodore 64 camp, because at school all the boys, it was never the girls, all the boys had a computer, and you were either a Commodore fanboy or a Spectrum.
It's always been the same.
Fanboy.
Are you Sega or Nintendo? Are you Xbox or PlayStation? It's always been the same. There's always been two camps and then a third sort of on the edge or whatever. And Nintendo was a bit flopped in.
So the thing is, that there were the Commodore fanboys and the Sinclair fanboys, and then we went and got a Dragon 32. It was like, oh, that doesn't make us any. So we were in the third camp. And then, because there weren't any decent games, we then bought BBC, because we started getting some money. And that put us in that camp, but actually, it was really good games on BBC.
There was some phenomenal, we bought it because it was such a powerful computer. We loved playing all the games, particularly Acorn Soft games. They were just absolutely amazing. But then we realised that actually, it was difficult to actually make any money on that. It was like, well,
and it was difficult to compete, because actually the best of the best programmers were on the BBC. Right, it's really awesome games, and you just like
Elite, obviously, and Revs, and you're thinking, blimey, it's very, very difficult to compete in that market, and the numbers weren't there either. Whereas we were going, well, something like that.
And we wanted our games to be published. We wanted them to be successful. So we'd seen the fact that on the Dragon 32 there weren't many games, but it was a good computer. And then Amstrad came along, and we're like, oh, there's a good computer. It's got a nice keyboard. If we actually produced our games for that, there aren't many games for it. It could really go. And actually, that's what we did.
And it was based on a Z80 chip. So you wrote it on the Amstrad. Then we realised they weren't selling particularly well, but we liked the quality of the games and the ease to write it. Yeah. It had a disk drive and it had an external compiler.
And we got really good at writing games on it.
And we'd written our tools, map editors and sprite things and stuff for that machine. But Codemasters said, look, the real money's in the Spectrum. And we thought, where's the Z80? We had a look at it, and it's like, actually, we came up with a way to write Spectrum games, which were pretty much straight ports, same code and everything.
But we wrote them on the Amstrad.
We wrote them on the Amstrad and then ported it across.
And with a cable, we could actually just link the Amstrad to the Spectrum and then spit them down.
We never actually typed on a Spectrum. So we actually did manage to avoid that. Even though by this time you could actually buy the Spectrum Pluses and the 128s with nice keyboards. We never actually did. We just used it as a slave computer, programming it via the Amstrad, and it worked really well.
Everybody also expected us, because we were sort of best-selling authors on the Spectrum, to actually understand the Spectrum. Well, the keyboard, can I just grab a bit of the keyboard? I remember going round to somebody's house once, and they said, we were the Oliver Twins, best-selling games on the Spectrum. They said, could you tell me how to get this word over here? And it's like,
yeah, shift control function.
Actually, we don't know. And we were looking at it going, don't know, because we just use ZX up and down and a cable in the back. And we don't use any other buttons, and we never touch any other buttons, so we don't know. It's like, and they were like just absolutely staggered. And the funny thing is, I worked out the other day because I'm preparing for, some materials for this book that's being written, the Oliver Twins book. We actually never owned any Spectrum games. We never purchased anybody else's games ever.
I've never really thought about that. No, you're right. We didn't ever buy any games
because we didn't use this for playing games on. We had a BBC sitting next to it. Why would you do that? We had a BBC with a disk drive, so we actually only ever used a few buttons on the Spectrum ourselves, and we never played any games on it, except our own, obviously, while testing. Right, there you go, there's an interesting fact.
I forgot, And
we never owned a Commodore 64, and actually most of the games that came out on the Commodore 64 are games, as in the Grand Prix Simulator, Ghost Hunters, Super Robin Hood. We didn't actually play them, we didn't even see them. This was something that quite often Codemasters would organise. We'd go to a meeting at Codemasters and they'd show us the game and say, are you okay with that?
Sometimes we were, sometimes we wouldn't, but sometimes it is Sky anyway. It was like, Yeah. There was a couple of ports we didn't think were brilliant, but
Yeah, but we weren't really that involved with it. There's a couple of games that we actually ported other people's games. There's the Fruit Machine Simulator, which is a very sad story. Our artist, who was a best friend of the Darlings and grew up with the Darlings, was James Wilson. And he'd actually started doing some loading screens for us. And when we went up to Codemasters, he was always there and doing artwork for other games. And he did the artwork for all the Darlings games. And he'd done this design for Fruit Machine Simulator. Mark Baldock had started programming the Spectrum. He may have even finished programming the Spectrum. And unfortunately, one evening we were invited to a party, late November. It was a pretty horrible night and everything. We actually turned it down because we didn't want to go. Because
they all got blindingly drunk.
They all got blindingly drunk, and unfortunately, yeah, he died that night. He fell off the pier. Conversation came up about we could actually do this guy's game because he'd shown us a design. We had a copy of the design, and we were like, we could do this guy's game and everything, and sort of basically the royalties will go to the family and stuff. So we were like,
yeah, we did that.
Yeah, that'd be quite nice. So that was one of the first ones we did. We got approached by an agent who'd got the rights to Ghostbusters 2. Now, we were massive fans of Ghostbusters, the film, and we'd seen how successful the first game had been in Ghostbusters, and like, man, we could do Ghostbusters 2. So they'd already started writing a Commodore 64 version, and so they approached us to say, would you like to do the Amstrad and Spectrum version? So, and we'll pay you to do it, convert this Commodore 64 version. So we did that. Actually, we did do ISS first. Just before that, he'd approached us with another game, ISS, Incredible Shrinking Sphere, convert from the 64 across to that. So whilst we were working on that, he then went off and got the rights from Activision for doing the Ghostbusters 2. So that was awesome to work on.
We generally kept these things quiet because like, we were working for Codemasters and there were lots of games coming through Codemasters, but when sort of somebody comes through from Activision saying, can you write a game? It's like, well, we'll do it, we'll just keep quiet about it. But that is kind of a funny thing because we would always go to Codemasters and people go, how the hell do you manage to write a game, like so many games in so many formats? It's like, yeah, doing some other stuff as well.
You don't even know. And actually, for many years, the Incredible Shrinking Sphere, nobody even knew was us because we didn't put our names on it. Because we actually figured it would offend the Darlings. There was no agreement to not write games for anybody else, but we thought they might get upset, and they were our mates, and they were doing a great job for us publishing. So we just thought, well, we'll do these other games, but we won't tell anybody. But Ghostbusters 2, we did have to put our names on that one.
Yeah, we wanted to take credit for that.
Yeah.
It was quite a lot of work.
So when Activision or anybody would get the rights to an arcade machine, they'd go, well, go and find the arcade machine.
Go and copy it.
Go and look at it. So there was so people used to suck ROMs and stuff like that to grab the graphics out of them and stuff like that. But generally, some lawyers at the top of these companies, Activision to Konami or something, would basically agree a deal. But the programmers wouldn't talk to each other. The designers wouldn't talk to each other. It's like, well, you know where the machine is. It's like, go and have a look. Go and copy it. So absolutely, that's what happened. When it comes to films and licenses, we were shocked. But
the Ghostbusters 2 is like we were showing the Commodore 64 version in development and saying make a copy, and it's like, well, what have you got from the film company? It's like, well, we've got a script, and it's like a typed script of who says what, and it's like, so you can get a vague sort of what the flow of the story is, but you don't know what it looks like.
I mean, it helped. It was number 2.
Yeah.
So you look at the first Ghostbusters and you go, well, I know what the main characters look like, so that's good. I can kind of guess how they do their ghosts. I can kind of guess the architectural style of buildings.
That was a massive help. But the idea that you're in any way involved is just no.
You're not. You see as much as the people making the lunchboxes.
And because it always came from the marketing division, it was licensed. And to be perfectly honest, we've done many games since of films.
It's always the way.
It's always the way. Yeah. It's like the number of times, and I won't go into some of the stories, but very big movies that we've done games for, we've not seen any footage of movies or anything. We pretty much get scripts. You're lucky if you get a few photos or screenshots or something. And we've made horrendous mistakes of games which are supposed to follow the movie, and everyone's seen the movie. Well, it's the one thing we didn't.
Yeah, we never saw. So it's quite interesting. I mean, he said he won't go into all the stories, but obviously we've done lots of movie games over the years. But a classic example is Mummy Returns. So it's Mummy 2. It was always known as Mummy 2.
At least, again, there was a Mummy 1 film.
So we had some reference.
We had reference of Mummy 1.
We had a script. We had no visuals. We went along to America to the what do you call it, E3 show. Our game, Mummy Returns, was on the screen to be reviewed, and that night was the premiere of the film in America. So we were invited. So the game's already on the stand
and finished.
And that night we were allowed to go and see the movie.
If your offering is accepted, the gods will bless and make a gift to you in return.
So the game was finished, mastered, on the stand, in front of journalists before we ever saw the movie. So we actually went to the movie going, I wonder what this movie's about that we've kind of mastered and finished the game for. Some bits tie up really nicely. Some bits you look at the game and you go look at the movie and go, I'm not quite sure why they did it like that. So it's like,
yeah. Dizzy. Now that's the sort of interesting one that obviously everyone knows us for. And there were starting to be platform games. There had been Chucky Egg, Manic Miner, a couple of others.
Panic.
And
we played BBC games like Frack and stuff like that.
Yeah,
which
but
really
so we'd obviously done Super Robin Hood and Ghost Hunters, and
so this was kind of the third in the series, really. I mean, this Robin Hood, Ghost Hunters,
so
and now a different character.
It was becoming a genre. Platform games was one of the genres, and we thought, well, we could do that. But one of the things that we noticed is, and it's probably mostly from playing Frack on the BBC, is, and actually Manic Miner. God, they're so hard. It was just like, and we were saying, well, how come, like, because game players are fairly casual and they just want to get through the levels. Why are they sort of jump pixel perfect on every jump? And we've done it a bit. And we just thought, well, we want to make a game that you don't have to do, a platform game that's not pixel perfect jumping and is going to kill you every few minutes. But then people said, but where's the game? And we said, well, the game is trying to adventure and work out where to go next. And we've done a bit of this in Robin Hood, of sort of opening doors with the right key.
Yeah, everybody kind of assumed that gameplay meant challenge. The two were linked together, and actually that's what was the common accepted practice. And we were saying, well, why
and
can't
then challenge
gameplay
being twitch.
Dexterity.
Dexterity and twitch buttons.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not a game.
Whereas we were thinking, gameplay is kind of more than that, and adventuring is fun. Working out what's on the next screen and trying to solve this puzzle. Because we loved some of the text-based adventures. The Zork from the Apple IIe, and then we had a bunch of Acorn soft adventure games on the BBC. And these had gameplay, but it wasn't about Twitch. It was about trying to solve the puzzles and solve all the problems.
We were trying to sort of make adventure games into graphics.
Yeah.
I
believe Hobbit and things like that had been on the spectrum, but we didn't have those games, so we didn't know.
Yeah.
But later people go, oh, it's a bit like, and it's like, yeah, well, we didn't have those games, so we don't know.
Yeah. And obviously the thing about Dizzy is it said the ultimate cartoon adventure. We love cartoons. We're not artists, as probably some of our graphics shows, because we drew a lot of our graphics, but thankfully the computers are so poor we got away with it. But we loved animation and cartoons, and the idea of people bringing non-real things to life, because there were two types of TV and films that we grew up with. The ones where you stick a camera looking at something, or something fantasy, which had to be drawn, and we just loved the total fantasy of cartoons. And it's like, well, we wanted to make fantasy world, so therefore I don't know why it took so long to call the third one fantasy world. We've always said, let's make some made up fantasy world that looks as good as a cartoon. It was our goal. Dizzy's an unexpected success, but we didn't know it was a success. Now that is really weird, because the games that we'd written before had gone to number one in the charts. So we had written Super Robin Hood and Ghost Hunters
and Grand Prix Simulator.
And Grand Prix Simulator. They'd all gone to number one in the charts. Dizzy didn't. Okay, so to us it was a flop. So yeah, unexpected success. Yeah, it was a flop.
We got some nice reviews, but when it actually came to sales, we were really disappointed by the artwork on the cover.
And when we were out and about, not that we got out that much, a lot of people talked about Dizzy. When we did meet people, it was like, it was Dizzy, and they didn't talk about Grand Prix Simulator and things, which was kind of interesting. And then
Activision did.
Yeah. then there was a very curious point in the fact that fan mail started turning up at Codemasters, and this was the really weird thing, is letters were turning up and the secretaries at Codemasters would bring things, like, we'd occasionally go up to Codemasters. We lived a fair distance.
A 2-hour drive.
Yeah, so we lived a fair distance, but we'd turn up and it was like there was a sort of a load of mail for us, and it got to a point where there was literally a sack one time, where they gave us a sack of letters. They're for you, and what are we supposed to do with this? And you open the letters,
and they're all Dizzy.
Pretty much. Dear Oliver Twins, I absolutely love your games. I've been playing your game, blah blah blah. But I've been playing your latest game, Dizzy, and I am stuck on. And then it would always vary. And it was really sweet. They're all handwritten, because this was days before computers and typewriters and stuff, and they were all handwritten. They were all
not before typewriters.
No, but yes, but they were all from kids, and the kids weren't using typewriters, so they were always handwritten, and you just thought, this is amazing, and it was so sweet, and we'd never had this before.
So we started replying to the first few, but it was actually taking quite a long time.
Yeah,
it does take a long time to type a letter.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, we obviously just start typing the same thing, but you realise you have to actually answer the question, which was always different. But then I think we diligently spent a week saying, let's get through this. Nowadays we have that at work, we try and get through CVs sometimes. You think, no, let's just knock it out. And I think we spent like most part of a week like writing through and feeling really chuffed that we'd answered all these letters and gone, but we're not moving forward, and actually
we're not doing another game because of this.
We're not doing another game, and like, what happens if this just continues? And it did continue. Yeah. So then what we did is we spent some time and we wrote up
a script,
the
full solution.
The full solution, and then what we did is just started posting back full solutions to people. So
well, actually, we gave them to the secretary.
Yeah, we gave them to the secretary.
Post back.
Said, just write, thank you, the very sweet or whatever. Here's a full solution.
So they were thinking that's not a very good solution because they were only stuck on one bit, but you gave it to them all.
You've given them the entire game,
which is a bit of a shame because now they're not going to be challenged on the rest of it. So
they're just playing.
It doesn't work very well.
And also, Codemasters said that they were only making 40 or 50p per cassette.
So every kid that writes in, they've
lost their money.
They've lost their profit. So we came up with this idea that if we recorded it on a cassette and then we put it on a telephone line, then people could ring in. They'll hear the solution,
and then they'll
get as far as they need to hear what it is they got stuck on, and then they'll put the phone down. And we thought, well, that's quite a good solution. And then completely by accident, the only telephone service that existed at the time to do that was called the 0898 service.
Premium phone calls.
Premium phone calls.
And we didn't intend it to actually happen that way.
No.
We just tried to solve a problem, but actually it ended up making quite a lot of money.
Yeah, because actually people had to pay for that phone call. So Codemasters started heavily promoting it. We agreed royalties with Codemasters for these telephone lines, and actually all the Dizzy games from Fantasy World onwards, we actually made more money off the phone lines than we made off selling cassettes and some of the games. So times change. We were very, very successful, first of all, on the Amstrad, and then we were able to get the Spectrum in,
and then the ports were done.
And then other people would do ports to the Commodore 64. Then people started porting to the ST and the Amiga, so Fast Food and Treasure Island, Dizzy and that. They started appearing on the ST and Amiga, and we were looking at these programmers' games and meeting some of these people.
They were very, very good and very clever. I mean, very good artists on the ST and Amiga, and some very good programmers around us. But the one thing that scared us on the ST and Amiga is the fact that, I mean, yes, it was a new language and it was loads of memory and stuff like that, which kind of like, oh, it's going to be quite a development thing. But it was like, everyone that we knew, they said, oh, come round, oh, look at this rack of games I've got, because it had all gone to discs and there was just piracy rife. And it's like, and every time I saw an ST and then the Amiga, people would always just go, oh, I've got racks of games. How many games do you want? It's like, how many have you actually bought? And it was the first time that piracy had ever hit us. We'd always been aware that on the Spectrum, people had occasionally copied a tape to a tape, but it was always a bit rubbish, and it would still be 50-50 whether it loaded.
And our games were being sold for £1.99, £2.99.
And it would cost you a bit to buy a new blank cassette.
So people weren't bothering that much, and if they were bothering, well, you haven't really lost a sale to those people because they didn't have any money.
So the ST and Amiga were there, and all we could see is all fanboys loved it, and they loved it because they didn't need to buy games. And yet these games were being made from Psygnosis and these other companies, and we're just going, oh my god, it's just a mess. So we were having this, like, we've got to jump off the Spectrum because it's obviously the old tech, and we loved tech, we wanted to move forward.
This was about 1990, I guess.
We wanted to move forward.
89,
and then we went to CES, the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, and my god, it's like, just go to Vegas or America or anything. It was just like,
it's an eye-opening experience.
It's like, but we went there, and I think it was into a couple of years worth of Nintendo games had been out, and it was a big push into America. And
this was 89, 90.
We just looked at the size of the market and the fact that these cartridges, you just pushed them in and they played. And we looked at the sort of Marios and stuff and thought, we could write those.
Yeah. So I just to sort of
zero privacy
to show you where we were at that time. We were in our bedrooms writing. You occasionally go out, you occasionally meet one or two journalists in a room. You very, very occasionally met somebody that played your games, because we didn't really get out much. We went to the shops and you could see our games on the shelves, and you could see maybe the charts printed. So it's like, oh yeah, the sales are there. We get royalty statements done.
But
you've never actually met your audience. You've never seen how big it is or whatever. You see a royalty statement and go, that's quite good. Quite a lot of people must be buying this. We went to CES, and you walk into this hall, which is the size of Wembley Stadium, and everybody there is playing and buying games, and it's just vast, and you're just going, oh my goodness. And then you look at the games and you go,
yeah, could do that.
And you go, so this Mario thing, which is the first time we'd ever seen Mario, we'd probably heard of it. First, we saw this and we're like, so this one here, what's that all about? And it was, I think it was $30 you had to pay for it, and they were up to about 20 million sales. And we're like, that'll take us about a month to write. It's like, and actually, we could do the artwork, we can do the programming, it's 8-bit, that'll be pretty easy. And so then it was just an epiphany of like, we need to be doing NES games.
Yeah, so there is an interesting thing about the NES in the fact that it changed things completely. Consoles coming in was a completely different model. Up to that point, there were hardware manufacturers making computers, and software manufacturers wrote the software they wanted, and they just did what they liked. Whereas a Nintendo and subsequent consoles have changed the entire model to saying, we're going to produce a machine that's really, really cheap. You can make software for it, but you license and then sort of.
Well, back in those days, you had to.
You had to get them to manufacture.
You could only put a game out onto a console via Sega or via Nintendo.
Well, it was a cartridge, and so they produced. They made
and in fact,
cartridges.
the contract was you only pick one or other. If you have a deal with Sega, you don't have a deal with Nintendo. If you have a deal with Nintendo, you don't have a deal with Sega.
Yeah.
And for 3 or 4 years, that's the way it was. So EA was aligned with Sega, and several other companies were aligned with Nintendo. That's the way it was. Codemasters decided that they didn't like that. They were a publisher, and they challenged that and actually said, no, we want to produce these Nintendo console cartridges, and we don't want to go via Nintendo. And that landed them in some hot water with Nintendo, and in fact with Sega, because they then started producing Sega games the same. But they got through that and proved that actually, as a third-party publisher, you legally were allowed to produce these cartridges. And in fact, that did change the whole global industry, so that the likes of your EA and Activision and everybody else now can produce games on whatever consoles they want.
Wonderland Dizzy was the sort of final game that we wrote that sort of never got published because things got too difficult.
And it was a stressful time. I mean, because Codemasters were up to their necks in sort of legal actions. We had offices and staff.
Oh, we'd started to employ some people at this
We
point.
weren't being paid, and our money was just disappearing. We needed to find new people to give us contracts.
But we had a reputation. we had a very good reputation, and we knew that there were people like Activision who would give us games. And so we ended up talking to an agent, because in those days, just like actors and footballers and stuff have agents, we talked to an agent called Jackie Lyons, who was representing a few sort of very good programmers like David Braben, and she said, look, I could find you work. If you want to if you want to get out of the Codemaster thing, I'll find you work. And it was like, okay.
So, and as a result, we'd actually completely forgotten that we'd written the Wonderland Dizzy. It was only recently when we kind of discovered the map in my loft, going,
Wonderland Dizzy, what happened to that?
What happened to that? It's like, did we ever do that? Did we ever finish that? And then we were on stage at Blackpool, just discussing the fact, did that actually happen? Did we finish this game? It kind of looks like it finished, like we finished it. So we were discussing it just after we stepped off stage, going, well, if we finished it, then it's in my loft somewhere. Because one of the things we worked out was, once we'd published Robin Hood and we'd got to #1 and we'd got £10,000 of royalties, we thought, we're kind of famous, and 10 years time, 20 years time, we're going to look back on this and go, wow, that was awesome. So let's not throw anything away.
No, but
so we don't throw anything away.
The other thing is, some conversions had happened, and when you do meet a programmer and he's writing a Commodore 64 version of your Spectrum, the first
you want to give him all the code.
He says, where's your code, where's your graphics, where's your maps?
Actually, we were very good at sending people our stuff to convert.
Yeah, we did actually. So we
never got it from other people, but we always gave it back.
Yeah. Actually, if we're missing stuff, it's only because somebody didn't return it.
Yeah, no, that's actually true. So we thought, well, therefore, if this exists, then somewhere in my loft, but bearing in mind that this was kind of 25 years later or 22 years later, somewhere in my loft will be all the supporting artwork and discs, and maybe even some ROM codes and stuff.
And we found it all.
So I went up there and hunted around, and after 2 or 3 hours of hunting through old boxes, I managed to find the original, the final source code disc. So after the Codemasters kind of separation happened, we obviously wanted to write games. That's all we knew, and that's all we wanted to do. We just needed to find some new publishers. So we met up with Jackie Lyons, an agent in London, who represented people like Eurocom and Argonaut and David Braben and Ian Bird, who did Elite. Ian Bell, sorry. And she managed to get several contracts with Argonaut, with Domark, who wrote the Marco's Magic Football. We then managed
Bullfog, because I wrote Theme Park and Syndicate on the Mega Drives.
That's true.
We did make a lot of money in those early days, but it was just the two of us in our home.
Yeah, when you take,
but once we went to console, we started to employ artists, and then we got an office, and you suddenly have an awful lot of commitments, and you see the
and you burn through the cash very, very quickly.
So we just needed reliable work.
Yeah. So we did that for 6 months. We were very, very keen on the PlayStation. So we'd started doing 68,000 and the Mega Drive and Genesis. But Sony had approached us and told us about their new machine that they were doing. We actually thought it was really, really cool. The idea of a computer with 3D graphics.
And a CD.
And a CD-ROM.
We'd written games on CD.
So
the first games on CD.
And we didn't have an affinity or an alignment with Nintendo or Sega, because we'd been the Codemasters. So when we'd been approached from Sony, or Psygnosis I think it was at the time, about the PlayStation, we managed to talk them into giving us a dev kit, which was brilliant. I think Jackie Lyons obviously helped with that. And we were just thinking, this machine's absolutely awesome. So we basically started developing games on the PlayStation.
This was, and we got the dev kit a year before it came out, and it was amazing because now that we were with an agent and she was setting us up with meetings, we were going and meeting people and saying, oh, we're writing on this new PlayStation from Sony, and we were just gobsmacked by how many people just said, never worked. Absolutely never worked.
Sony responsible for Betamax.
They just did Betamax. That is a complete failure. And how can they possibly touch Nintendo and Sega, and we were going, the machine is awesome. Like, so...
Come and have a look at the game we've written, like some of our demos and stuff.
Yeah, and the demos that Sony sent out. I mean, Sony's main demo that they showed everyone was a dinosaur, a 3D dinosaur walking around, and this was when Jurassic Park was in the cinemas, and they had this 3D dinosaur, and it was like, we're going, this is in a different league.
Yeah. So we decided with sort of our 8 or so employees to basically back the PlayStation.
100%.
100%. We went into lots of meetings with lots of publishers, and unfortunately, most publishers were saying not interested in PlayStation. They'll do another Betamax with this. But we just kept ploughing on. Ridge Racer came out sort of day one, and it lit up the world and it went ballistic. The PlayStations, they couldn't make them fast enough, and we were like almost the only devs that had been banging on about this thing, and obviously Psygnosis. But so few developers has actually even looked at the PlayStation, yet we were already up to speed. We were already producing games. We produced Creature Shock on it, a conversion from the Mega CD and the PC. We had this game Fire on Claude that we were in the process of developing. We managed to sign that one with BMG, who were just coming into the market.
But then what happened, the PlayStation was so successful, and it was CDs, that all the movie studios turned to it, and suddenly there was a Fox Interactive, a Disney Interactive,
Universal Interactive, all of them basically.
Universal, they all set up interactive divisions, because suddenly they're going, massive mass market machine with a very strong brand of Sony behind it, and we can bang out CDs, which is kind of a pence. It's like...
Well, they're so much faster to produce, so much easier to store and ship around the world, so much easier to reorder. In fact, that's actually
so everyone loved the market, and the PlayStation just
reignited everything.
And then so all these new interactive film divisions
and toy companies, because obviously we got a lot of work through Hasbro.
They all suddenly wanted developers who could develop games, and we were like, there you go, we develop games.
But then of course PlayStation 2 came along, massive new challenges, everything changed. It was a little bit tricky for us to sort of get over that hurdle of kind of ramping up, especially as we'd been seen as Blitz of doing family games. So we needed to sort of change our image a little bit and sort of do some sort of more hardcore games, more adult games. So things like Mummy Returns we did, and a few other games like that. And then the game, after a slight slump, started to take off again. And by about 2010, we were up to well over 200 people, and that took us into the PlayStation 3 era.
So we ended up falling into this, taking a brand into a video game. But to be perfectly honest, we actually really liked it. When you're controlling teams of people, if you have a team of 10 creative people in front of you and you say, make an original game, it's just infighting and battling. Whereas if somebody brings, like a Disney, bring you this sort of new concept for a film, you go over to Florida, I'm thinking Lilo and Stitch in this case, a few of you go over to Florida, you have a great time, you meet some creatives.
They show you some storyboards. You're not allowed to leave with anything.
Yeah. you go back, you've got 1 year to write a game. We found
it was well financed.
Yeah, we found it all quite exciting.
You
and everyone
knew
loved it.
your game was going to come out. One of the issues from sort of the 95 for the next 15 years.
Loads of developers.
Anybody who would do an original game, just actually getting them out and published was actually really, really difficult, because the actual distribution and the marketing was so expensive that people would finish games and then it not be worth the publisher to actually duplicate it and manufacture it and put it out. Whereas when it was Lilo and Stitch, well, of course it's going out. When it's a movie or a game tie-in, of course it's going out.
And you can creatively control a team to write a nice game going, you've got 1 year, it's the movie, we'll try and get as much resources as we can, but everyone knows the exact target. And we all enjoyed making lots and lots of games of movies. We're always frustrated that we're never quite as good as they should have been, because there were just so many constraints and so many things that worked against us.
So unfortunately, Blitz got up to over 200 people. I think it was 235 at its height. But then everything changed because the market changed, because everything went digital. Now digital changes the equation so much. You'd obviously had teams getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and dev times getting longer, because if you've got a Call of Duty in a box on a shelf, and that box costs £30, and you've got something that the dev team was a quarter of the size and a quarter of the budget, but it's also going to sell for £30.
Yeah, it was less than that.
Then as a consumer, what are you going to buy? Well, of course you're going to buy the Call of Duty every time. So what actually happened was there was no middle market. There was no sort of reasonable budget games. There were and low budget. It was never worth distributing. So low budget there was none of. Then there was the medium, which we'd kind of serviced that market. They started to disappear as everybody just started focusing in on the big blockbusters and the really expensive high budget ones. But then digital distribution came along, which meant that actually if you make something that's quite small on low budget, you don't have to sell many copies and there's no distribution issues. So that works. Middle market kind of works, top market works, but what doesn't work is a brand coming along like a Disney or a Hasbro or something saying, well, we've got a kind of middle market license, so like a SpongeBob or something like this.
For consoles.
For consoles. It's like, well, where does that fit into this equation?
So that market disappeared, and one of our main publishers was THQ. Probably half the games that we did over the years was THQ, and they went bankrupt because that market disappeared, and we were like, oh gosh, writing's on the wall. Now we still could go a little bit further with Disney and people. They sort of stayed in there, but it's like we knew that the writing's on the wall.
So
sort of games.
So we had to try and change our business. A lot of people were saying that our business should change to mobile, but everybody wants games back in those days for 69p, $1.
$1, yeah.
Everybody wanted games for $1, and it's like, and that was tough then to see how the economics would work out. But of course, very quickly it went to everybody wants everything for free.
And when you've got 200 odd people
staff to say their salaries,
the overheads are phenomenal.
So that wasn't going to work. That was never going to work.
So we're going to write games that we can charge $1 for.
So we decided to sort of go the other direction and look at the likes of your World of Warcraft and things like that and say, well, what if we applied all of our people to creating a massively multiplayer online game? We can't be undercut by the little guys. Digital distribution is awesome. We've got all the technology, all the skills, all the resources and everything. We could do this. So we were actually starting to align ourselves in that way.
And saying this is where we see the market is a very big server-based, free-to-play game that we serve globally.
And unfortunately, we had a bunch of clients who then stopped paying us because we were still doing console games which were in boxes, and they stopped paying us, and so unfortunately
it's very sad, but I mean we literally had no money, so if you can't pay people, that's it. It's as simple as that.
Morally it's the right thing to do, but legally it's also the thing you have to do. If you can't pay people, you can't carry on. So that's when obviously everything crashed and burned at Blitz, and it was a very, very sad time, and we were quite scared of, well, what are we going to do now?
What's the future?
But one of our clients, Smilegate, we just started working with them. We were working on...
we just started talking to them.
On SkySaga. And basically Richard Smithies, who was then taking over our sort of business development at Blitz, had a great relationship with them, and actually he managed sort of behind the scenes to talk to them and say, well, what if we set up a new company? What if we could get some really good talent and everything? Then would you back us? Could we do this game for you? And that's how we started Radiant Worlds. So we founded Radiant Worlds, Rich and Andrew and I, and we approached a lot of the good programmers and artists and developers
that knew us. So we
knew us from Blitz that we just made redundant.
But I mean, everyone understood why it happened. I mean, so
most of them, we made 50 job offers and 49 people accepted because they understood why it had happened. It wasn't us trying to shaft them or anything. We meant well. We had to do it. We had no choice. But now we've got this new opportunity, funded by Smilegate. It's very creative, and you guys as a team can work together, and we can make this work, and we can make it happen.
And that's SkySaga, and it's going phenomenal well. Yeah, super chuffed, and everyone is just doing a brilliant job.
SkySaga is obviously our current, but actually, now that we're digitally distributed, now that we've got a community, now that it's all online and the game's evolving, you could say, well, we could run this for 5 years, we could run this for 10 years. But actually, where would it stop? Why would it stop? Because if we can always improve the client side by just sending down updates, and we can always improve the server side, then what have we fundamentally got? We've got a community that's growing. The community are adding the user-generated content, and they're adding their own creativity to it. We're living in a fantasy world. We've created this fantasy world, which is always going to be popular.
We can always bring in new story elements, new features, new things. I've often thought sort of what would be the ideal game, and I think we've ended up sort of in a very good position where you can just keep growing this, and if people come along later, it will just be more impressive.
But it's a fantasy world where we can make up what we want, sort of thing. So I don't see that if in 10 years' time we're going to be going, we've kind of run this idea out. No, we haven't. We're going to be there let's just keep going, let's just keep going.
We've got so many ideas.
So we don't actually see a day that SkySaga will ever end. We just see it growing and growing and growing. And the interesting thing is that it'll be very difficult for another developer to come along in 5 years' time or 10 years' time and go, I'm going to compete with SkySaga. Good luck, guys. I think we got a bit of a lead on you there.